Welcome to the Brainstorm with Sparks and Finn, a podcast where we brainstorm the science and philosophy of a new age, an electric universe age, and what it means for the human race, past, present, and future. I'm Finn, sci-fi author, purveyor of fine cosmologies, and absolutely, positively not suicidal.
It's not plasma, it's not electric. I'm sorry.
And I'm Sparks, physicist, experimentalist, and also positively 100% not suicidal.
There he goes, kitty.
Today's guest is a natural philosopher, electro-geologist, and a man who joined the Navy out of pure spite, just so he could become petty officer. Introducing Robert Hawthorne. Today's springboard topic, twin comets. Visual candy or the harbingers of the apocalypse. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, let's see where this one goes. Okay, I'm ready to go.
All right.
Hi,
So
Robert.
Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Good. So you've seen a couple of our brainstorms before, haven't you?
I have, and I'm excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Oh, sure. Fantastic. Okay, so what are your hobbies?
My hobbies, I like to go see the petroglyphs now and go check out, different sites. In fact, Ben and I are going to be going to see what's it called here? Canyon Pintado and the Dragon Trail in western Colorado here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
If you guys,
Isn't that right, Ben?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
Yes,
if
sir.
you guys ever make it out to Washington, you'll have to check out Eastern Washington. It's got all kinds of wonderful little clues to what happened there.
Do you have any
Yeah.
petroglyphs?
Oh, I'm sure there probably are. What I find interesting is the water ripples in the plains. Yeah, they're huge, indicating some pretty big waves.
Right. I wish I would have known at the time what to look for, because I was getting out of the Navy from Bremerton in 2007. So I drove actually back down to Salt Lake from Bremerton there, and I went through, Eastern Washington into Idaho, and then basically back down into Utah. I think you cut through Oregon a little bit there for a little bit of where the road that I took. But yeah, I didn't even know what to look for. So I was just driving probably through that area and didn't even know what to catch, but unfortunate for me, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things you wouldn't know to look for anyway, unless you were way up in the air.
Yeah.
That. I watched, speaking of stuff to know what to look for, I was watching Jeffrey Drum's Sunday site visit video, his latest one he put out. Guys, he's just walking around Saqqara, Egypt. It's just another city there with pyramids. And there are these huge stones that are just littered, like litter, on the ground. And they clearly have carved channels in them. They're clearly manufactured for something. And to just walk by them and realizing they're not being studied, not being looked at, they're being completely ignored, is just staggering. I actually sent him an email and said, is anyone researching this? He says no. In fact, the pyramids themselves are being completely ignored. Archaeologists are only studying the tombs now. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, after watching Drum stuff and then going back and seeing them talk about Egypt as a bunch of tombs is pretty wild. It's like, no, I don't think they were tombs.
I think some of them were used as tombs later,
Right.
in the same way that we repurpose homes and buildings and put new buildings in old, or new services in old buildings.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like, but
So this week we're taking a look at your salon presentation, right?
Yes, we are.
Awesome. And are we just going to run a slideshow kind of like we did with Andy? And
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Right.
we'll just,
I'm excited.
right into that, and then have whatever
it's good.
Q&A. I was actually able to finish mine without going over the time limit. So, and I never actually added anything back to it. So I guess we can have an extended Q&A for a while if we want.
Cool. Well, a quick question up front. I just did a Thunderbolts presentation about the comet that started the Chicago fires, and it was also a double comet, I guess.
I saw the one on
Comet Biela.
Comet Biela, that's right. And it split into two pieces that were connected with a plasma bridge, and they got further and further apart, and then they transferred their glow from one fragment to the other.
Right.
Is that a double comet, or are you?
Well, that would be like whenever Ben actually talked in the Twin Comet video that we mentioned that people can go check out on Buddy James's Geometric View. Can check that out, the Twin Comet event. He talks about how the comets can actually bifurcate eventually, and we see that sometimes when they actually explode or whatnot. They can actually form twins, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the theory that I see, because sometimes you actually see like polar configuration petroglyphs, but you also see two other things on the outside like that. And I know I've talked with Ev about this, because I wanted to get his opinion finally on it, because I know whenever I mentioned it to the Thunderbolts community that they just kind of never got back to me. So I didn't know what was going on or if they were interested or not, but I just still wanted to get the information out there.
Right.
So I did that because it would always intrigue me, because that one petroglyph from Three Fingers Canyon is what really started it all. And if you actually notice it, if I guess we'll get into it from the presentation, there's actually like two comets that look like comet sighting spring. You know, if you can look at that, anybody can Google search that, and it's got like that fuzzy, glowy, glittery tail. You know, and there's two of them, so they could actually, what gave me the idea of, you know, what was going on with a double comet event, have those happened, and that led me into the Native American lore of, you know, so many twin hero legends where they use lightning as their, you know, weapon of choice. They all basically avenge their mother's death, and they meet each other later in life because they were separated at birth. And it's all like a archetypal story that, you know, we usually see. Has been
sorry.
shown.
No, please finish. Please finish.
Okay. Yeah, that's the summation of that whole twin idea. And I had, like, you know, other ideas. I've actually have other petroglyphs and pictographs showing basically extended hands, or 6-fingered, 7-fingered hands, which could be like resembled of, you know, a cometary feature, especially when they're extended, and
right.
Or they're backwards, you know, with the, you know, the thumbs both facing outwards, but they're still in twin in appearance, but they're still reflective of each other. And that's what got me into that idea, of that whole idea. And then if there were ever like two comets passing by the atmosphere during like what we get into as the Miyake event, of course we'd have a bunch of aurora in the atmosphere at the time. And how would those comets that would be brushing by affect the aurora features, which would be presented as the confronted animals, or the anti-confronted animals, of like the same feature being mirrored, right? Yeah, or basically symmetrical, but back to with their backs to one another, being anti-confronted. And I wanted them getting back to Ev, because I wanted to get his opinion on it. And he had mentioned that there's really not too many references to twins other than the Venus, you know, Mars relationship. And I do agree with that. You know, I don't ever want to contend with that idea, because it's all based off of the central figure. And when the two broke apart, eventually they would be taking on cometary features, behaving like twins. You know, especially with what we know as Venus doing what she did with her brilliant hair features and tails, and Mars with the thunderbolt, and, you know, they both would be behaving with cometary features, but zapping each other at the same time.
Right.
But it's the ones that I wanted to focus on, where you see multiple comets, where there's multiple sets of twins, like 4s or even 6s, you know, or possibly 6s. But the focus is on 4, when there's, like I said, there's 2 bodies outside of a polar configuration, which is where you have your 3-body, you know, feature that, you know, Ev seems to talk about, when there's 2 more outside resembling something else that's going on, or something else that's doing something. That's what I kind of like to focus on in these presentations. And then also started my my original start with Thunderbolts was, you know, getting back to Upheaval Dome, and how that was actually a electrical discharge event, not an impact strike. And
so you wrote
Go ahead, Matt.
You wrote a peer-reviewed paper about that, didn't you?
I did. It was in an interdisciplinary journal, so it was based on, because I have my discipline is in electronics engineering, but it was focused on primarily in geology and geophysics and how that could have worked without the impact event. So I had to get into that, and that paper left me with the question as to what kind of an event could have caused this to happen, because this isn't type of lightning that you see every time kind of day. That was something that would cause a 5 rim crater at the outer rim, diameter, something that large, event like we don't see that kind of lightning, at least in recorded history,
Right.
So what would kind of cause that? So I had to look further back, and that's when I kind of saw, I started to understand induction and, principles of electrical theory, and got my associates in that. And then I started doing more research, and it was right around the dawn of civilization that we had this triple Miyake event where we compare the power levels in this presentation. I'll get into this in a second, but this is just a quick overview of the power levels that are involved. It's like 80 times stronger than what we know as the Carrington event. So we've always talked about that in thunderbolts as well. So if we're at something that's 80 times stronger, covering the entire planet at the same time, people seeing features, this could explain, what could have possibly caused the polar configuration to have broken up, because it would have affected Saturn too and Jupiter at the same time with such a big power level filling up the whole heliopause. And, definitely if two comets were zipping by, they would have been glowing up and doing some things too at the same time.
Yeah.
So regardless of if it's these two comets that I talked about, it's just these ones I bring up because NASA just detected a pair that looked like twins. You just said that, what was it again? I screwed this. Biela. Okay. I keep want to say bileal. So it's Biela. Okay. And then I referred to Donati's comet in the twin comet theory video, because it was the head of Sinbad, where he's holding two serpents with it seems like double layers on the head of the snakes. That they could be the comas of a comet, a twin comet event. So that's gets back to that same motif of master of animals, Podneotherin, and we'll get all into this in this presentation. I guess I'm going to start to share the screen, and we'll just get right into it.
Cool. Yeah, let's do that.
Let's see here. So there's some built-in entire screen. Yeah.
I had pulled up some other images of some comets that were starting to bifurcate. And so the idea that you can have a double comet, like what you were saying, is already out there in nature. It's not like we have to invent that and say, maybe this happens. We can already see it happening.
Right.
Do we know the electrical explanation for why that occurs, or is that something you're going to cover in this presentation?
The electrical event of what occurs,
why they bifurcate, why they
bifurcate. Well, I guess we covered in the twin comet theory that eventually the electron dissociation that Doctor what's it called? What's his name again? The gentleman,
Don Scott.
No, the other one, the astrophysicist. I think he's a Latin gentleman. What's his name?
Has he presented for Thunderbolts before?
Yes, he has, and he's a doctor, a PhD. I can't remember his name off the top.
Is this the Asian guy? Oh crap! I can see his name, or I can see his face. Oh, it'll come to me. Anyway, did he explained that, didn't he?
Yeah, he got into the electron dissociation, and as opposed to the photoluminescence of the snowball event, just sublimating into two pieces. That it's actually electrical erosion that actually happens in the center of which causes the double lobe feature to happen, and eventually they'll just break apart at that if they continue to erode at that spot.
Right. Oh, that's where the ecliptic is being eaten in by the discharge. Yeah, so that's why they're all peanut shaped, and so that will actually cut them in half eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
Yes.
And then sometimes if you get an intense one that'll reach into the core, they'll connect and just blow the whole thing apart, and then you still have two pieces, or they'll have a big old trail of something getting completely blown to pieces.
Yeah, that peanut shape is something that I don't know how anybody buys the mainstream explanation of rocks just smacking into each other. I did another Thunderbolts about that called Impossible Asteroids, I believe.
Yeah, that.
Yeah. And these impacts should have shattered the rocks, and yet they just stick together for some reason.
When I zap stuff in my lab, one of the first things I noticed is that a chevron appears. Like if I just take a pile of powder, whatever, and I put my electrode above it, and it doesn't matter what shape the electrode is. A lot of times it's just a flathead screwdriver, but it can be a roundhead screwdriver. It doesn't matter. The discharge coming off that will cause a bifurcation. And you asked what causes it. I don't know. That's just the nature of electric discharge, is that you will have the electrons splitting off, because I guess they don't like each other, and it will cause a chevron to form around two lobes
Ah,
on the powder. I've got so many videos of that process. It's so easy to reproduce.
huh.
But it's, yes, a bifurcated or split feature is common. That's what one of the things electrical discharge does. The end.
Yep.
Wow.
And that's what he commented into in the video about the bifurcation and the formation of the twin lobes, because he actually zaps them into double lobe features as well, like CJ Ransom has done. Yeah. Here we go.
There we
Well, I
go.
imagine it's
You,
got to
There
do
we
with
go.
the pinch
you go
point.
full screen.
I used Ben's computer the last time I did this in presentation mode.
All right. We'll try and shut up. I can't guarantee it because Matt and I are very interested in what you have to say, and we tend to jump in, even though we're trying to keep our mouths shut.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. We can do that.
Mostly
like I
Ben,
said-
I never interrupt.
Neither do I. All right, Robert, take it away.
All right. So my presentation that I did at the EU Salon is entitled Induced Telluric Currents from Miyake Events and Their Effects on the World. I dedicated this presentation to loving memory to my father, Robert Frank Hawthorne Sr., and our friend James Wesley Hill, because without them, I'd have never gone down the rabbit hole to get the information that I'm about to give you today.
To Robert and James.
To Robert and
and
James.
James. Little background on myself. I served in the United States Navy between 2003 and 2007 on board the USS John C. Stennis, CVN 74. As an aviation bosun's mate, second class petty officer, I specialized in crash and salvage, which is the flight deck fire and rescue team. And that's my crew there when we were in the during the surge of the Bush campaign.
Where are you?
I'm actually the funny part of this is I'm actually the little tiny head on the left hand side that's standing behind the three bigger gentlemen just off to the left of center.
Oh, right behind the black dude?
Yeah, right behind the black dude. That's my friend Jules. Yeah, he was like a mentor to me. So yeah, so I was standing close to them, and I didn't really get in proper position when they took this shot. And I was on my way out in a few weeks anyway because my contract was up, and I was getting sent off. So I was just sitting there talking. I didn't pay attention to when they were actually getting the whole shot ready. So I was just sitting there, and all you could see is my head. So, like I said, so after I got out of the Navy, I used my GI Bill to earn an applied associate's applied associate of applied science and electronics engineering from the Salt Lake Community College in 2020. That same year, this is when I wrote the paper titled "Electric Discharge Not an Impact Caused the Formation of Upheaval Dome, Canyonlands National Park, Utah," which was peer-reviewed and published for the Journal of Systemics, Cybernetics, and Informatics. So we're going to get right into this now. Kinetic impacts are currently the only accepted explanation for the formation of craters on the Earth by mainstream scientists. They believe that only the high pressures and temperatures generated by hypervelocity impacts can cause shocked lamellae and quartz crystals. However, recent studies have discovered that lightning can also deliver these pressures and temperatures to shock quartz, as well as form the glassy spherules found in some glassy meteorites. Also, lightning in the form of telluric currents or electric currents which travel through the layers of the Earth can be induced to form positive step leaders rising up out of the ground, forming craters. Furthermore, recent studies on superflares from the sun, or what are called Miyake events, can induce such telluric currents to destructive power levels and could possibly be responsible for some of Earth's craters. This presentation will propose the theory and provide supporting evidence a Miyake event has induced telluric currents in a transformer action by stepping up the existing power levels to form upheaval dome here in Utah, as well as suggest a triple Miyake event was witnessed by the ancients influencing world culture. So we're going to get into the obsession stone, which was Robert and James's little pet project, and then we're going to get into telluric currents and upheaval dome. The story starts back in 1996 when my father, Robert Frank Hawthorne Jr., took a couple of samples of a rock he named the Obsession Stone, which both he and his friend Wes Hill thought was a meteorite or tektite, to the University of Pittsburgh. There, Professor William Cassidy examined them for analysis because he was a chief geologist that was talking about meteorites. He wrote a book on them. He had been to Antarctica about 16 times just to, collect little pieces of rock on the ice shelf that would, obviously have come down from space to be up there. So he was kind of a authority on the subject. And since we lived in Pittsburgh at the time, he was the guy to go see. They did several tests on them. They came back unidentified, so they couldn't really tell us anything. And he suggested that we send it to the NASA center, which I'm going to get into in a moment, but here's some information from his letter. At first, quote, our graduate student, Henry Prelvitz, has been examining a specimen you submitted as a possible impactite from the upheaval dome structure in Utah. His preliminary observations are that it consists principally of irregular shaped colorless grains of isotropic material, accompanied by rare rounded isotropic grains. Both the irregular and rounded isotropic grains are probably glass, end quote. And there you can see a picture of it. I actually took that picture while I was at BYU when I first came out here from Pittsburgh, try to get this thing as a business venture off the ground. And I just wanted to get some evidence of something that was under a microscope, see what it looked like. And then all these balls showed up. And I thought that was really interesting because I never saw that in any of my geology classes. And then come to find out there's all this information now of, lightning forming spherules and glassy spherules in its wake.
Trillions of them on Mars.
Right. Did you see those that I sent in the little Mars rover, seeing these spheres everywhere?
Yep. Sure did. Yeah.
Yep.
Smoking
you asked
gun.
me if I could make some. I've actually got the stuff that CJ sent me. I'm going to be doing it this weekend. So
yeah, I watched him. He did this when I had the Electric Universe Geology page on Facebook. Before I completely, I'll comment on that now because I guess if anybody wants to know, I completely destroyed that page out of hatred for Facebook and their censorship. So I was just basically the Facebook, format itself can just go pound sand and everybody can take what they've learned and go from there.
Right.
I was done with it at that moment.
DARPA book.
They what?
So,
What'd you say?
I said DARPA book.
Oh,
right. So, also from that letter, quote, in our experience, the specimen is different from other impact glasses, such as those associated with the Ayalul crater in Mauritania, the Henbury craters in Australia, the Waybar craters in Arabia, and the Monterrey crater in Chile. All of these occur as fragments with a general slaggy appearance and contain embedded spheres of nickel iron alloy, end quote. So like I said, they weren't able to identify it, but so they recommended we send it to the Johnson Space Center with NASA, and we were able to get a response back from Mike Zelensky, and this is his letter here. Yeah, he does identify the mineral as analcime, which is a hydrated sodium aluminum silicate. You can see the numbers there, and it suggests that the mineral resembles a volcanic glass, which is what we're getting back into the electrical process that's going to be possibly causing these things. And from that letter, quote, I enclose all your samples, I think, that you sent to me, along with the results of an X-ray diffraction study of these two samples, which came out with identical results. The samples are a combination of analcime and calcite. The gross petrography does resemble devitrified glass, but this could have been a volcanic glass, end quote. And that's the actual sample that I had sent in to NASA. They did the thin section off of, and you can see those two protrusions that are like kind of shooting down like comets. That's kind of where we had them focus on where to take the slab from. So they did the whole area there, and it basically came back the same as analcime to another brown polished ball that we had. It looks like a 7-ball off of a pool table. Both of the attempts to ascertain if the obsession stone was a tektite were unsuccessful. But I at least now knew what the mineral was. I was still left with no mechanism as to how this unique form of analcime came to be, since I wasn't aware of any volcanism aware, or excuse me, aware of any volcanism in the past in that area. What mechanism could form rocks made of glassy spheres? Also, can that same mechanism create craters as well as deliver the temperatures and pressures required to shock quartz?
Yes.
And you can see there on the left-hand image, that's just a general picture of an alceme. It's that red, orangish red kind of ball there with the trapezoidal, pentagonal or trapezoidal faces on it. And it's kind of based on its crystal structure. And they usually form that way. Sometimes they're pink, sometimes they're green, sometimes they're even clear based on their, whatever impurities they have growing with them. And as you can see, that's much different from the version of the obsession stone that we see, where these versions, you can see they're either just like a purplish in color to a brown, and they have a lot of inclusions in them. They're not anywhere crystallized at all. They just look like rough globs of sandstone. So something that caused the metamorphosis was basically the point here. And there was no volcanism around at the time that I was aware of. And then really that was left at a loss. So for several years, I didn't really do anything with it. It just sat in the back of our yard. And then I kind of got into the electric universe community. That's where they got into electrical theory. Some people exposed me to these upcoming papers here, starting with this one titled Lightning-Induced Volcanic Spherules, where Kimberly Gennaro and her team explained how volcanic lightning strikes are responsible for forming glassy spherules in the ash deposits. From that paper, quote, "This study reviews the known glass spherule forming processes and proposes for the first time a mechanism induced through the heat generated by volcanic lightning in eruptive columns and plumes during explosive eruptions," end quote. Also from this paper from the same year, titled Lightning-Induced Shock Lamellae in Quartz by Rito Guerre et al., discussed how lightning can also produce the shock patterns found in quartz, which were previously only thought to derive from the temperatures and pressures that an impact event would produce. And from that paper, quote, "Using transmission electron microscopy, we show that planar deformation lamellae occur within quartz in the substrate of a rock fulgurite, i.e. a lightning-derived glass. These lamellae exist only in a narrow zone adjacent to the quartz fulgurite boundary and are comparable to planar deformation features caused by hypervelocity impacts of extraterrestrial objects," end quote. Now I understand that lightning can in fact be the mechanism for creating glassy spheres and rocky bodies and is able to shock quartz. I then wondered if lightning could create such a large crater as Upheaval Dome, like I mentioned before. It's 5 kilometers wide in diameter at the outer rim. Then I also came across and discovered what telluric currents are. And for those that still aren't aware of what these are, this is just a general definition from Wikipedia. Quote, "A telluric current is an electric that flows underground or through the sea, resulting from natural and human-induced causes," end quote. An example of naturally induced telluric currents can be seen in this image from the Discovery Channel Raging Planet series. Quote, "Lightning has an extraordinary effect on objects on the ground. They respond to the strong electric field by growing positive streamers that reach anywhere up between 3 and a few hundred feet above the ground," end quote. And you can see in the image, the main strike is off on the right-hand side, and towards the center view, there's some of those positive streamers that are reaching up, trying to make a connection.
Leaders.
Let's see if we can pause that here.
I heard somebody talk about leaders the other day. I think it was a kid from Veritasium, and he said that electricity doesn't follow the path of least resistance; it follows the path. I'm going to say this wrong. I guess it's not the path of least resistance; it's just the one that's easiest to. No, that's still the path of least resistance. I'll get back to it.
All right. On the YouTube channel Barely Science, Jacob Gable connects positive and negative electrodes to the top and bottom of a wine bottle, respectively. Gable filled the bottle with dirt from his backyard and brought the chamber to low pressure with a vacuum pump. When electrically charged, a plasma, or in this case, the telluric current, is seen forming a crater from underneath the surface.
Look at that.
That's so cool. That is so cool. And there it is right there.
Yep. And I think in this video sometimes that you can actually see where the result is actually in a hexagonal form, and or one of his videos. So that kind of backs up kind of what you were showing me earlier there, Ben, from your experiments too.
Clearly unscientific woo.
Yep. So that kind of we'll get into the geometric shape of these electric currents as well. Let's see here, next page. And another experiment, Gable effectively demonstrates a cross section of the telluric currents traveling through the Earth or the dirt in the to the surface as suggested.
Wow.
An intense current could explain the igneous center of Upheaval Dome, and if anybody's been there, you have the wind gate layer, then you have basically the lower layers of the Munkapi and the Chinle areas, but right at the center there, it looks like it's just something got literally scorched, the Earth, and it's just chiseled, and it's not really like chiseled, but it's just like if you actually stuck the electric cables to it and then just let it get zapped for a while, and how if you've ever seen corroded metals or anything, how it just pocked and torn up and just tortured. It has that same resemblance there. Something made it igneous at the center of that dome, but yet still stuck around. This could explain it as opposed to an impact event.
Right.
I got a couple things to show you at the end of this that it's pretty cool. But Matt, I don't know if you know this, but Robert and I took a trip down to Upheaval Dome a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh.
That was awesome. So amazing. That whole trip was awesome. I mean, it was just things we ran into everywhere. But I mean, we hit Upheaval Dome, we hit Canyonlands, and we found that butterfly figure. I'll have to tell you about that later. On the rock. Remember the one we turned around for? Jeez Louise.
That's a high-speed camera filming that discharge?
I believe so. I think it's just real time. It's like you can actually just play it. I can play it again here, and I think it's just real time. It's this one is at 8 times high speed. So or slowed 8 times.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, so actually you can catch it.
I need to call him and see if he got that wet and what his vacuum pressure was.
I think he does mention he puts ice in it sometimes, and then just sees what it does, and then just like an ice cube or two in there.
I gotta call him again.
So we're moving on here, and this is where we'll get into the explanation of the geometry of the electric currents. In this video from the YouTube channel Electric Universe Eyes, David Brown narrates from the paper Polygonal Crater Formation by Electrical Discharges, by Wayne Byrne, 2015. Here, Byrne provides a conceptual model of the inside of an electric current and how these currents form geometric shaped craters.
Does anybody have any idea what the standard model explanation for hexagon craters is?
I have no idea, but I know
don't care.
I know that when they've done like nuclear experiments and everything, or like bullet shots into the sand and everything, sometimes you'll see a hexagonal, formation occur, but then it still dishes out and forms the round rough crater shape. But sometimes you can, I guess, whenever they say the energy expands, it starts to take the most efficient shape, which is the hexagon at first, and then it fans out and forms more of a concentric circle.
Huh.
But that's just my best guess from what
I'm
they're
just going to
saying.
ask, while you're talking, Robert, I'm just going to ask Google, and we'll talk about it when you're done.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, jeez. This is stupid.
Oh, the mainstream
explanation. My God, yes.
Does it involve dark energy scaffolding?
Hexagonal craters, also known as polygonal impact craters, due to a combination of the impact event and pre-existing geological features or stress patterns on the surface.
So they think those hexagons are like
we're already there.
Cracks in the well, how did those cracks get in there in the shape of a? That is so stupid.
Oh, I shouldn't do that.
God. Maybe it was rising air packets that started a spinning motion.
Jeez Louise. All right.
So moving on. The central image is a cross section of an electric current by burn, illustrating the hexagonal shape and how one layer of the layer. One layer of the current is out of phase with the surrounding layers. The same feature is visible in the outer and inner rims of upheaval domes, suggesting this geological site could very well have been formed by an electrical discharge. And as you can see there, the central image is there's that cross section by burn where you can see the hexagons are kind of, twisted around from each other. And then you can see the same feature in upheaval dome when the inner rim is kind of a rudimentary hexagon because there's two sides are blown out. And during a lightning strike, there's been several images of, lightning strikes where it's a hexagonal shape, but just the two of the branches are more forcefully protruded outwards, I guess, from the energy release. And now this is still, evidence of that. But then you have the outside hexagon from the outer rim as well, which is just, I drew those in just to give anybody reference to the image on the right. Now I'd like the viewer to compare these images. The image on the right is the end result from another one of Gable's experiments. And you can notice how that the surrounding terrain of the electrical discharge is similar to the surrounding terrain around upheaval dome. And I'm just basically in reference to the escarped edges, as you can see in the cliff edges around upheaval dome, and then also in the sandy particulates that are surrounding the central crater inside the electrical discharge inside that bucket that Gable's done. It just showing a similar fashion is here, as opposed to when you have an impact crater, you would basically have something that would be dished out. You'd have a bunch of dust trails going out in radial arms, and you don't see any of that in either of these images. But you can see in the rocky images around upheaval dome on the outer rim, down around the 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock part of the rim, you can see these lines that are going through the rock, and they're not actually centered in on the center of the crater of upheaval dome itself. It's actually more fixated on the inner rim edges. And then you can also see it on all over the other, rocky cliff edges. If you start to see lines start to reach inward, they're only going towards the inner rim edge, not towards the center of the dome itself. So that could be like the spiraling effect of an electrical current.
Show us with your mouse pointer what you're looking at, because I know what I think I'm looking at.
So if you could see, this is where I started off. If you said down around the 5 and 6 o'clock position, you can see lines in the rock, right? And they're all kind of like lined up with the edge of the dome itself. Okay.
Yeah.
Start to see again. There's more lines that are in here, but you can start to see more over on this protruded edge here. They're kind of lined up with the edge of the inner rim. They don't actually aim towards the center of the dome itself.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So that would be something that's twisting and turning as it was going in there. Even if they were just like hypersonic winds from the current, basically, as Andy Hall just recently mentioned in your earlier, episode, they could be etching and, forming the patterns there that would just be brushing across as this electrical current came up out of the ground.
Right.
So this would then, again, I got into what kind of the kinetic event could cause telluric currents to be so violently induced, because I never, talked about the energetic event that could have caused the upheaval dome to be an electrical discharge, and like I said, what could have, that was an unleft question for me to get into. So that's why I kind of went further into research, and would like to get into at least a possible idea or theory with the Miyake events here. So in this article by Sci News by Natalie Anderson, astronomer Zulin Tu, I hope I said his name right, at Nanjing University states, quote, super flares are much stronger explosions than typical solar flares, with total energies varying from the 10 to the 33rd to 10 to the 38th ergs, and a duration longer than an hour. And I just gave a little bit of reference there because an erg is a unit of energy. It can be converted into joules, which most of us are more familiar with. And 1 erg is converted to 100 nanojoules, or 10 to the minus 7. So now you can just do some simple math in your head now, and with a little note there on the side, the average lightning bolt can deliver about 1 billion to 10 billion joules of energy. So that's just kind of during one of these, super flare events, how much energy would actually be absorbed into into our poles and through our atmosphere.
Oof.
Can I interrupt a sec?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
10 to the 33rd power. Isn't that the same number they throw out to explain the difference between gravity and electricity?
It's close. I mean, I think it's like 10 to the 36. There is something like the difference between the gravitational force and the electromagnetic force. But yeah, that's
Same
somewhere
neighborhood. It's still
it's
off
in the
by.
same. It's definitely in the same neighborhood. Especially when you're dealing with you're starting at 10 to the -7, and you're taking away 10 to the 10th. You still have a huge balance and a huge amount of power that we're dealing with here.
Right. Carry on.
Okay. But then again, so then I was left with the question is, can this energy actually be converted into lightning? Otherwise, there's really no, we just get some fancy aurora and a really cool light show for a while.
Mm-hmm.
However, earlier in March, I wrote this for the EU Salon. Phys.org published this article by Los Alamos National Laboratory suggesting, quote, cosmic ray showers seem to play a pivotal role in triggering lightning flashes, end quote. And the article title is High Energy Space Particles May Play a Role in Initiating Lightning Flashes. From that article, quote, these cosmic rays produce secondary high energy electrons and positrons in the atmosphere that further ionized the air and created pathways in thunderclouds, allowing lightning to follow and travel faster, end quote. So you can now, when we go back to the original, energy levels, and we can actually generate lightning from these, solar flares or cosmic rays, we can have some, basically some tremendous weather effects causing basically, supersonic winds and geological erosion. So it all backs this all up. Let's continue on with this article by Ben Turner in 2022. He writes about how radiation storms caused by cosmic rays or strong solar flares have been affecting Earth for thousands of years. He also writes that scientists have been using dendrochronology to track carbon-14 spikes in tree rings. From that article, quote, named Miyake events after the lead author of the first study to describe them, the spikes occur roughly once every 1,000 years or so and are recorded as sudden increases in the radiocarbon levels of ancient tree rings, end quote. And as again, after reference to Dr. Fusa Miyake. From that article, same article, quote, but instead they discovered that Miyake events did not line up with peak solar activity. And some events, unlike the brief flashes we recognize as solar flares, lasted for 1 or 2 years, end quote. So here's a chart of some of the recognized Miyake events that they have studied. And this is from the Zhang et al. From the paper titled Modeling Cosmic Radiation Events in Tree Radiocarbon Record. And I think that's from the Proceedings of the Royal Society. And it shows the some of the instances here. There's the little a little note I had at the top here, but the Carrington event was 80 times less powerful than the AD 774 event. And I tried to match up the colors there. And the AD 774 is just the one that's right off the center, the bluish one there. So that's a pretty high peak. And the reference here is you basically have your y-axis where it's the density of the carbon-14 spikes that we took on, in reference to the x-axis, which is the steady state production, which is the years of steady of time. It's how many years. And so you can see the lower one here off to the left, the 5410 one, roughly lasted over a year, but the other ones were much more intense.
Sorry, which one of those was the Carrington? Was Carrington on there?
So the one that's off to center, just right off to the right, the bluish one, that's the AD 774 event. I'm not sure. I always get this mixed up with the 990 AD event, which is, I think one of them is called the Charlemagne event, and I keep thinking it's this one, but I could be wrong. It could be the 900 one.
I don't see one that says 774.
Let's see here.
I see 775.
Yeah, 775. But the quote was from. These are two different papers, so they were right. As you can see, they're about a year long. So it's as in the years of steady state production. So that it's around that time, the time frame that they said that this event happened. So yeah, they mentioned in the table 775, but I think from the quote from the Turner's research that he gave it the 774 event. It's roughly the same event though. So yeah.
I didn't realize they lasted so long.
And it could have been, because like we just talked
either.
about this a couple weeks ago or a couple days ago, Ben, where trees have false rings, and that could be basically from how the cloud nucleation forms from a solar flare event, and then how that affects precipitation, which can actually a year of strong precipitation can actually cause extra rings to grow, which throw off dating and all that shit.
The more I see data like this, Robert, the more I'm thinking that we actually understand a smaller and smaller percentage of what the electrical nature around us actually is doing.
Yeah,
true.
Environment.
Well, At this point, I think it's pretty safe to imagine that it does pretty much everything, and we just have to figure out the process.
We're just trying to figure out the process, and then and hope that other people start catching along, as opposed to making up forces and particles and pretending like they're, just because they wear a lab coat, that they have some position of intelligence.
Hey, I wear
hope in one hand, and that's true.
So I guess we shall move
I use
on
the
here.
power of my lab coat all the time.
I always like the mod. It's really good when we're out in the hot and it can reflect the sunlight and it keeps him cool and everything. I think other than that, it's yeah.
And it has big pockets.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can just store the rocks in there. Okay. In this video, Ben Davidson from the YouTube channel Space Weather News uses data from NASA of a magnetar burst cracking its own surface. He suggests a scalable version of this event could happen on Earth, and it is my contention Upheaval Dome is the area where the current exited the ground in one of the many known Yawkey events. And I shouldn't have said known. I should have taken that word out. I realized I haven't yet, but it's probably a mistake because there's been so many of them. I can't really say which one it was. And there's been events that go way beyond the tree record. So, but what I'm suggesting here, if you can see my cursor, is this magnetic field line would be where the energy is supposed to surge out of the ground according to the simulation. But then there's also that, according to the Byrne illustration, you got that extra layer, or the second layer of the electric current, which was the forensic patterns left on this as a scar on the surface of Earth, and that's what I suggest that the crater of Upheaval Dome really is. So we'll get this playing here.
And again, we can't hear this at all, unfortunately. Whee!
This is pretty cool. Who did the simulation for you?
I think Ben did it, actually, because it looks a lot like his.
And just FYI, everyone, if you don't already know, Ben Davidson is a persona non grata in the inner circle of the EU.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I found it out from Ev. I'm like, oh shit.
I know he kind of had his outing with them. How do I get back out of here?
Which is unfortunate because he was.
Yeah, what's the deal with that? Does he not believe in the electric universe theory, or is it just more of a personal thing?
I think he went crazy. He accused Wall of murder.
I know. Yeah, there was a whole big spiel about it. And it started with him. I think it was right before, shortly after 2017 conference, or sometime between 2019. But sometime in that time frame, it was he was trying to take over Thunderbolts, just administratively, and be the head honcho. And I guess they gave him not only the no, but a fuck no. And he kind of retaliated in a huge rant on all the YouTube and all that stuff. But I think that I talked with Ev too, and I think during one of these rants, he actually accused, or not directly, but he said he had actually information of someone telling him. So I guess he had secondhand knowledge of Wall actually murdering somebody in Australia.
Was it the standard model of space?
That would be great if it was. I mean, in fact, let him be tried for that one.
So who did he murder?
I don't even know. I think because from what Ev told me, it was like he said he thinks it was this guy that they never found, or it was a whole convoluted story that he never really. It's all secondhand knowledge. So I was thinking,
Well, he
for
must
Ben
have
to
had
be
it
an
coming.
attorney, an attorney, you would think you'd have to make an accusation like that. Wow,
Yeah, maybe it's true. Maybe it was some mainstream guy.
here,
Somebody was telling him about black holes and he just had enough, I guess.
No, I don't think it had anything to do with that, but yeah. And I actually got to see shortly after that happened, or was it before? But it was right at that time. I was actually going down to the Albuquerque Observing the Frontier conference, where I got to see. I got to talk to Dr. Peratt right across the table, because he was doing his little breakout room presentation where he was just talking to the general public. And I got to, stand there and talk to him for a moment. And then I also got to see Dr. Pierre-Marie Robitaille. Never got to talk to him, but I did get to take a picture of him, with like photobombing my picture, my selfie.
Yeah.
I intended for that to happen, but yeah, I caught him in the background.
Huh.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, Ben, we're going to have to get Ben Davidson on, clearly. I want to hear about this murder plot.
Right. Yeah, because I vaguely remember hearing it, because then it was just like I just kind of wanted to stay away from the whole situation, because it was like, wow, what the fuck just happened here? Oh, sorry. But that's when it went on in my head. So yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It was. All right. Continue.
Yeah. So continuing. So I would continue on further with more questions in my head. Is there any evidence of these types of solar events happening in historical records? If so, how is the culture influenced? And this is just basically, answering why is this important to us, and basically look at it through more of an interdisciplinary attempt, like, in homage to the, Velikovsky and Talbot and their styles of research. Sorry. So that's what gets me, and we're going to be getting into the three-legged crow legend, Potnia Theron, the head of Sinbad pictograph here in Utah, and this is where we're going to get to touch up on the twin comets theory that I developed and Ben kind of participated in. If Miyake events are supposed to only happen once every 1,000 years or so, as the experts suggest, these three events occurring within the span of 250 years caused me to ask if there were any historical counts covering the significance of these events. And as you can see here, the center one and the one on to the right had actually peaks that were from the Zhang chart that we just talked about earlier. Those two are actually mentioned in that chart. That's why I used them. And then this 5480 excursion of carbon-14 spikes is actually mentioned in the center paper from the 5410. So they were within 70 years of each other. And so it's like this triple event of these intense, carbon-14 spikes caused me to start focusing here, because this is right prior to the dawn of civilization. I thought maybe, we can actually see this revealing itself in human history.
Matt, do you remember, did those numbers look familiar to you at all? Because they sure do to me. So this is right about the same time that Ev was saying that all of the big stuff remember how we questioned Ev and said, what time did all this go down?
Right, because nothing appeared before the Neolithic period.
Right, and he was saying it was 3,000 to 5,000 BC, which is about exactly what this is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right, go ahead.
Let's see where this takes us.
Yeah, this is
I'm trying to find dates here, just because the dates matter here. I then put my focus toward that period of time and began looking for supporting evidence of these events influencing world culture. And in high school, I learned that Sumer was the first civilization dating back around 5000 BC. Is it possible the beginning of civilization and world culture as we know it was influenced by these solar events? I later heard of a legend mentioned by Neil Thompson in an episode of The Electric View called The Three-Legged Crow, and how it was basically the Asian creation myth from that same period of time. And this is just a general overview from Wikipedia for those that aren't aware of what the three-legged crow even is. Quote, the three-legged crow is a mythological creature in various mythologies and arts of East Asia. It is believed to inhabit and represent the sun, earliest and evidence of the earliest sunbird or bird sun motif or totemic articles excavated around 5000 BCE at China. End quote.
Oh.
And this is from another article that I did on just digging into that subject. This is from iNews. The article is titled "The Three-Legged Golden Crow in the Hexi Corridor." And the Hexi Corridor is basically a shrine at the westernmost part of the Yellow River.
In China.
And in that article, quote, the three-legged golden crow, in the article, quote, the three-legged golden crow in the Hexi Corridor by iNews states, it is the sacred bird in ancient Chinese mythology. According to legend, the ancients saw sunspots and thought it was a crow. Now you can see the image there, kind of what they were talking about, and that's an image of the Queen Mother of the West. This is kind of in reference to the westernmost part of the river where they put the shrine. The Queen Mother of the West is the head mother deity of the Chinese religions, or the ancient Chinese religions. Here's the three-legged crow is actually above her, and if they saw sunspots, you can see how big that sunspot actually is, that it actually plays like a Rorschach test on people that they thought it was a bird or a crow. Mm. So I was actually fortunate enough to see a sunspot when they had wildfires here in Utah. I was driving my daughter to school, and all the smoke was in the air, and I actually got to see a sunspot on the sun itself, and it looked like just like a pepper grain. And I thought it was on my windshield, so I scratched it, and it wasn't moving. But as I moved my head in perception, it stayed along with the sun. So I knew something was either in the clouds or on the sun itself. But then I learned that you can see sunspots through smoke or fog, or sometimes even heavy cloud.
Or while wearing sunglasses, it'll make a little reflection of the sun on one of your lenses, and you can look at it pretty clearly.
Right. Yes, and then you can see it then. Yeah.
Right, but
so
I'm interested in what you just said, Robert. That since the ancients didn't have sunglasses, how did they see it? Through smoke,
right? And for it to be that big in relation to the sun disk, which is what I'm going to get into here in a moment, but for them to see it be that big, I mean, does that cause for the sun to actually go dim because it's not emitting the direct light? Does that mean everything starts to go darker? So you're not so.
That's a good point.
That is a very good point. It'd be interesting to see if there was some agricultural response to that event.
Right.
Oh, very interesting thought. Of course, how long did it last?
Right. I'm trying to suggest that it was right in that time frame, or at least these ones that are, one of these is eminent of the three events within that 250-year span. Mm-hmm. So at least one of these they caught, which I'm going to get into right here in this slide. One of these events is what they actually saw as the sunspot. And I'll just get into this slide here. If you can see on the left, it's the Korean version of the three-legged crow, Samjogo, but it's outside of an emperor's tomb. But this one actually shows a full halo around it, whereas you can actually see when you do have a solar flare with a CME, if you have a concentric ring coming straight out at you, spreading out, you're either looking right down the barrel of this thing that's coming straight at you, or it's on the other side of the planet. Now, sometimes you can actually see them. They'll be blowing off to the sides, or you'll see like a circular type cone come out, but towards the right or up right of center or something like that. And it's not totally directed at you. But in this instance where I have the NASA image, where you can kind of see the cloud emanating as a concentrically out from center, it's coming straight at you.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm kind of suggesting in this image that they have from the totem of the Koreans, that they have the halo around it in a concentric form. That they caught one of these Miyake events, at least, as a kill shot straight down the barrel, and they were recorded.
Ouch.
Yeah, right. Ouch.
Yeah, I mean, on the bright side, eventually this theory will be proven right, but the problem is we'll probably all be dead.
Right. We'll see this thing coming out. It's like, there it is. We've got everything.
I was right.
We just melt.
Right. Well, when I was going to church one day, and they asked me to do a talk on what I was talking about, because they were all confused about what I was talking about, giving them my theories. And I was just actually talking like Ben, said with Dr. Carriage, just matter of factly, as if I just knew what I was talking about. Like I learned this my whole life, and just started speaking as, if you look at the sunspot here, it could actually be considered like Revelation 6:12, when the sun turns black as sackcloth of hair.
Yeah.
That, and then it actually has like an earthquake reference, and all kinds of heat and sunblast and all that stuff in a fire. Well, that would be, tied to a massive solar flare that could, we would actually see the sun actually going black.
Yeah.
So.
And if they're still not convinced, just tell them Wall's going to murder their ass.
We should get a T-shirt that says "Wall Thornhill murdered me."
Yeah. He killed Kenny.
It's electric, right?
He killed Kenny from South Park.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Oh geez. So moving on again. So it appears, at least to this researcher, the ancient Chinese and Richard Carrington did the same thing, which was to record the sunspot size in relation to the Earth-facing sun disk, respectively. I then asked myself, are the size of sunspots and sunspot groups relative to flare strength? So you can see here that the on the right image here, that's the sun disk where where Richard Carrington recorded the sunspot that caused the Carrington event, and as in reference to what the Chinese saw, and try to get the Earth or the sun disk itself just basically the same size, so that you could see the total relation in size to the sunspot of the ancient three-legged crow in reference to Carrington.
That's tiny.
I always thought it was significant that you never see the sunspots at the poles. It's always like someone did a measurement. It's like 17.3 degrees down or something, but they're always in a band right there in the middle. They're never above and below it.
That makes sense because that's the ecliptic, right? That's the ecliptic band where those two magnetic poles are forcing everything out along the ecliptic. So that's where you're going to have
I think that's a great explanation.
What was Don Scott saying about the fast solar wind and the slow solar wind having to do with that ecliptic band?
Oh, I can't remember what he said about it.
It's
one
like they have to be moving a lot.
The other one doesn't.
They have to be moving a lot faster to climb over the top of the voltage barrier or
voltage mountain. Yep.
Yeah, and so they're traveling a lot faster when they break through there.
Oh, when he's talking about as it being the PNP.
Yeah.
Yes. That.
So where there's not as much resistance, the solar wind doesn't have to be moving as fast to break out. So that's why you have a slow solar wind and a fast solar wind.
Okay.
All right, continue. Go ahead.
All right, so I'm continuing on here. So, according to this paper in Earth, Planets, and Space, the size of sunspots and sunspot groups are relative to flare strength. From that paper, quote, it had become clear that large sunspot groups with the potential to produce Carrington-class flares, areas of more than 3,000 magnetosheath, have appeared on a total of 119 to 139 days between 1879 and 2016. And a sunspot group with the potential to produce an X100 class flare appeared between March and April of 1947, end quote. So it looks like we dodged a couple bullets, and I'm not saying that all of these would have been Earth, facing, sunspots. They could have been glancing blows or off out into space, but we would have definitely felt the electromagnetic effects all the same, just because we were in the heliopause. It's just how intense would that, effect be?
Right.
Actually, I'm going to go back to that just because of how intense it would
please
be.
do.
Yeah, because actually I've been actually arguing, or not arguing with men, but just commenting on it. This is like a potential theory that's off to the side of what we've been doing. But it was, we're trying to based on these sunspot or these super or solar flares here, there was a paper that I read where they date back, 400 years of solar flares based on the carbon-14 spikes in tree rings. And they go back all the way back to the year of 1561, which was the same year of the Nuremberg sky event. And I was trying to make the contention to Ben that what happened if this solar flare that they go all the way back to 1561, now it doesn't show the month or the day or it just happened sometime that year, but it could have been happening during the actual event, which I suggested that event actually happened, I believe, sometime during the Lyrids meteor shower. So it could have been a solar flare accompanying a meteor shower, which was right at the time of the charge differential of sunrise and sunset, which was exactly what happened with this event. That they could have played with some charged meteors in the sky they danced around with their electric field and like basically, warred with each other. Everybody thought it was aliens, and all of a sudden they just came down to the, Earth and then just caught fire and burned everything they touched, which was what happened in the story. So it was basically saying that, it wasn't aliens, because I know a lot of people say it was aliens. I don't want to say it was aliens, but it was aliens. And I'm trying to say, no, it was just a solar flare with meteors at the right time. And it was a really cool show to watch, unless you got the shit fell on you.
Wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, right. So moving on, but that was just, I remember that was just, I wanted to throw that out there. Anybody can just ponder that idea. I then began to research any of the ancient cultures and legends based on the three-legged creatures. I discovered the Triskelion, or the Triskele, meaning three-legged, in Malta. I noticed the timing of the earliest appearance of the Triskelion, which is 4400 to 3600 BCE as well.
Wow.
I then assumed this is a good connection, provided the time for civilization to migrate this far west from the cradle of civilization, carrying with them the memory of the solar events these images originated from. In an article titled Isle of Man, Mystery of the Triskele, creative services professional and former journalist Ben Schmidt writes, quote, "One of the oldest uses of the triskele depicting human legs bent at the knee was an ancient symbol of the island of Sicily when it was a colony of Greece in the 8th century BC. Sicily's triskele depicts of 3 legs emanating from the winged head of Medusa. According to Roman author Pliny the Elder, the symbol represented the triangular shape of the island." End quote.
Can I interrupt again?
Sure, go ahead.
If they're putting that as Venus, couldn't that have been a proto-Saturn type observation?
It could have very well been, because the sun did play its role in this cosmic theater with the polar configuration. As you can see, there's a lot of images with the polar configuration. And I even say there's the sun and moon. If you're looking at like the image of Baphomet, you can see the 3 orbs. He's sitting on one, he's holding one, and then there's a fiery little image above his head.
Right.
But those would be there's your 3 spherical threefold bodies right there. And the other imagery is just how the plasma sheath, affected itself as some horned, anthropomorph.
Right.
So, and then we have those images on the head of Sinbad. We have that same image in the Val Camonica rock art in Italy. The same horned images with he's holding a snake, and there's the 3-body problem right there. But all these images all come back from the same time. So yeah, it could have, but the sun and the moon is usually off to the right and left, which I could either, as I said, could actually be reference to the twin comets again. So it could be the sun and moon. But the fact that they all did something in cometary, with cometary traits in a lot of the stories, showing that something was going on and that doesn't normally occur, and it's probably these solar flares that are causing a lot of energetic comas to form on all these bodies, and they all started interacting with one another, which is why I made a reference to the 1561 event. We actually saw one of these in smaller, scale during the 1561 event, is what I'm trying to claim. It's, you just got to get the right combination of, material. You got to have some celestial bodies in the sky in proximity to us, a solar flare or a cosmic shower from a cosmic storm, and it just energizes all the dusty plasma. Not only that, but the magnetic fields that are working with all these celestial bodies, and then you got a crazy story that can last for centuries.
Canon did. Hey, have either of you guys read any of Eduardo Cardona's material yet?
I haven't gotten into it directly, but I was exposed to some of it when I was at the 2017.
Because he's from Malta.
Oh yeah, that's right. He is originally. Yeah,
he's from Malta. So if anyone's going to write about the Triskelion, I'm guessing it's going to be him.
It's got to be. I definitely got to get into that, because I totally forgot, because whoever told me was from Chile. So I keep thinking, it referenced to him being from South America just from that alone. But yeah, you're right. He is from Malta. Wow.
He's from Malta.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. One other thing, kind of based on Cardona. So when Earth is following the proto-Saturn array, it's entirely possible as we draw nearer the solar system, they would be able to see the sun off to the side, wouldn't they?
Right.
And maybe Jupiter or something off to the other side at some point too. But No, that's a thought.
I
And
like
then
that
you're in
map.
the right position. That would actually create the reflection off the rim of Saturn too, giving
I like that a
crescent
lot.
in some point around the sun disk.
Yeah.
All right, so getting back to the story, with all due respect to Pliny the Elder, for the sake of this presentation, I must ask the viewers to put aside the quote triangular shape of the island part of the story and consider what we have left of the Sicilian triskele when compared to the three-legged crow image below. We have, quote, Sicily's triskele depicts the three legs emanating from the winged head of Medusa, end quote, compared to the Chinese where the ancients saw, quote, saw sunspots and thought it was a crow, end quote. Can these similarities be an archetypal story describing a great cosmic event? It is
Yes.
my conviction they are.
Indeed, sir.
Thanks for backing me up there, Ben. Here's another interesting fact I learned. I'm sure that most of us are aware of the stories of Medusa and her ability to turn to stone any man who met her gaze. However, in the Japanese version of the three-legged crow legend, Yatagarasu is said to have been petrified and is turned to stone at Kumano Hongu. And here's an image of that site here on the article that I show from greenshinto.com.
Wow.
So it just goes to show how these stories actually have so many similarities, but yet with the specialties of our disciplines, they don't ever come together and actually say, is something the same going on around the planet.
Yeah, I always wondered if that had something to do with, like in the Bible, there's the story about Lot's wife getting turned into a pillar of salt.
Yep.
And then you've got these forests of petrified trees that probably were transmuted to stone through electrical discharge.
Yep. And then the vitrified fortresses.
Yep.
Oh, be right back.
The evidence is just freaking everywhere. Everywhere.
So continuing on.
Yep.
Here's another image of a triskele called the Snake Witch Stone out of Gotland, Sweden.
This is awesome.
Not much of this. What's that?
This is awesome. I love this one.
I like this one too. Not much of this is known about this, and much is speculation. So I'm going to take the liberty to speculate as well. But you can clearly see a triskele on the upper portion of this stone here. The animals that are credited in this triskele are a wolf, an eagle, and a boar. And I just thought that was interesting to notice that the eagle was in there because in Sweden, where this stone has been found, they have the golden eagle, which has really dark brown plumage, and from a distance could even look black. So therefore you still got another image to another dark plumed bird, like a crow, or in this case, an eagle.
That's a good point.
In the triskele.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So it just shows there's another similarity in the stories, or it could be a similarity. The motif of the snake witch or the snake charmer at the bottom portion is similar to the mistress of animals, or Potnia Theron of ancient Greece and Mesopotamia, as well as the Pillars of Hercules motif and the head of Sinbad pictograph in central Utah. And then here are those images right now. There's the infant Hercules strangling the two serpents is on the left. The head of Sinbad pictograph is in central Utah, Locomotive Point. And the Columns of Hercules by Guinée Serran Pagan. I hope I said that right. Although the stories behind these images differ, one can clearly see a similar motif, yet are from cultures completely isolated from each other. Ben Hyde and I make the argument that this motif can be explained by a plasma instability involving the polar configuration proposed by Thunderbolts Project co-founder David Talbot, along with the frequent appearance of twin comets. I encourage you to view twin comets recorded through antiquity and their effects on world culture on the YouTube channel, The Geometric View. But just to touch up on that video, I'm going to give you a couple samples of what we got here. For example, the image below on the left is a Photoshop image I made from several images. The tree line with the pink aurora is from Yavi Photography. I don't know how to say that in Russian, but I did learn how to say it, the letters in Cyrillic pronunciation. So it's Yavi Photography. I took that image and mirrored it to give it the anti-confronted animal appearance, because if you can see, they look kind of like a pink swan or a flamingo type bird.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And gave it the anti-confronted image and inserted the common image from NASA, which I just enhanced to green with coloring, because sometimes you can see a greenish coma around comets. And I just put it in there for extra effect. And I laid it over the image of the polar configuration from the image from the YouTube channel Cosmism. Just by doing that, a striking resemblance can be seen when compared to the pottery artifact showing Potnia Theron, or the Mistress of Animals.
Wow.
That is amazing how close that is. That is amazing how close that is.
So you can see on the image, you can see the wings of the pottery dish, where you can see Potnia Theron. You have the wings, and you also have the spread arms, which is, resemblance of the Ka, the Egyptian Ka, which is spread arms. You also see these spread arms on the Gundestrup cauldron in Norway, and you also see like the same image of a humanoid head with glaring eyes and just two outstretched hands. But sometimes when they're holding animals, or in this case, usually they're choking them by the necks. In this case, there's two swans, but in the Gundestrup cauldron, he's choking two dragons. This is when I would suggest that the two comets were present, because you can see these little swastikas or star form patterns on the pottery, and or even the two little teardrop patterns at the 2 and 10 o'clock pattern on the rim of the plate. This is when I'm suggesting that the actual two comets are actually in position and just showing their presence, because that's how they would affect the aurora in our not just the plasma sheet. You can see the skirt of Potnia Theron would be basically the world mountain, and the plasma sheet that's coming to Earth with material from Mars. So that would be like the skirt of the goddess figure. And then you actually see the outstretched arms, or the wings, which would be the reflected rim of the sun from the sun on the planet Saturn, and that's as per Talbot in several of his videos. But then you would see the image of Venus, which would give it the primarily the female version of this deity, the threefold deity, whereas primarily sometimes it's Saturn, which is the primary feature of the threefold deity, and that's probably when the Mars is actually more in alignment with and closer to Venus, more in like the womb or something, where they're more centered. But this is where they're more out of place, and that's whenever the world mountain was, coming down, and it actually shows these features. And it was like during this time, when the Miyake event, you would actually have everything be charged that could actually, account for the charged material, which is incandescent, coming between Mars and Earth. We have aurora feature, which would be affected by the comets, which could give it that, mirrored image or anti-confronted, just showing this. And it all kind of makes sense with all this, why all these things could have happened at that time.
Wow. That's interesting that the Saturn polar configuration kind of explains why these gods always appear in threes.
Right. Like I was mentioning, because you could in this image, you can actually see the world mountain as what it's reaching up to Mars, but it's actually during the Pillars of Hercules, which is where this image still comes from too, with the two comets. The mountain that Hercules had actually split, which is what we credit to now as the Rock of Gibraltar, and on the European side, and then also on the African side, they either have what's called Monte Acho, I think that's on the Spanish part of northern Africa, or it's Jebel Musa in Morocco. They attribute the southern side to either one of two mountains, whereas it's the Rock of Gibraltar on the European side. But it's neither. If you look at the Greek mythology, the world mountain was actually Atlas at one time, and Atlas was petrified by Perseus using the head of Medusa, which we're getting back to Medusa again in petrification stories.
Right.
And the one of the tales that Hercules, or one of the what are those called, the tribulations that he had to go through, the trials or the labors, excuse me,
Yeah, there you go.
labors of Hercules. In fact, the 10th one, he had to actually get kidnap the bulls from Geryon, who was a 3-bodied giant. Here we get back to the threefold, being again. But it was since it was a male figure, I was presuming that it would be the Saturn feature was the primary part of this so-called deity, the threefold deity. But he actually had to steal red bulls, right, from the island of the Hesperides, which is where Geryon lived, and that was the red island where the nymphs lived. But he had to get red bulls, which would have been the arch with Mars with the arch of Rim, or the rim of Saturn, as appearing as bull horns.
Yep.
Yeah. the whole mythology is right there. The threefold deity, the bulls, the Hercules, even the pillars are there because he split them, which would have been a tale for the comets. And that's all there. And then we even had a flood that where some they say, what was it called? The Zanclean flood or something, where they say that that's where the Mediterranean actually did open up, and or the Atlantic Ocean actually filled in more of the Mediterranean Valley at some time in the way past. I don't like to get into dates and everything anymore because, Ben and I have talked about that. There's too many things that can screw with the dating process. So I don't like to talk about that. But let's just say, according to mythology and to science, that there was a flood where the Atlantic.
Yeah, I don't think we can really date anything anyway. I mean, the carbon decay rate has been shown to vary, and if it does, and we don't really know why, then we have no idea how much it's varied in the past, which means dating is pretty much impossible.
Right. Well, Ben got into it I got into it with Ben because I read some papers. We actually saw the Thunderbolts video where I think a gentleman talked about this, and then Wall kind of opined, but it shows that solar flares can actually adjust, radioactive decay rates even on a daily rate, so when they're not that intense. Now, if that was true, and they verify that, how can one of these events actually affect decay rates? Not only that, how could with the tree ring data, if it can make cloud nucleation to the point where we'd have like a 40-day flood and all those extra rings and energy in the atmosphere, could we get possibly false rings to be made, which would throw off the Denver chronological record? I mean, that's why I don't like it's all speculative to me.
Yeah.
This is why whenever you study science, or for me personally, whenever I study any type of science, I always want to look for the anomalies within that field of study. Because, and I brought this up before, when scientists whose paycheck is on the line encounter an anomaly, it's in their best interest to ignore it, to push it away, because it's not going to help them get a paycheck. But when you ask that question, when you become sensitized to the fact that, every science has anomalies, then all of a sudden the world just becomes a magnificently bigger place. And in the case of the EU, all the pieces start falling together. You're like, oh, wait a minute. This anomaly in geology fits with this anomaly in electronics, which fits with this anomaly in archaeology, which fits in with this one. You're like, oh, here we go. We got the big picture now.
Right.
Anyway, continue.
Okay, I'll continue. So here's where I got into. We were talking about the twin comets again and the petroglyphs that I saw. The left petroglyph was taken in Three Fingers Canyon, located in central Utah. The image on the right is a Fremen-style glyph taken at McConkey Ranch in northeastern Utah. Both images could suggest a polar configuration with twin comets present. The image on the right even has an arrow piercing the hearts of the gathered powers. Quote, I should have quoted that, excuse me, as mentioned by David Talbot in Symbols of an Alien Sky.
Wow.
You can see that image where it almost looks like four. It looks like four because there's a dot in the center, and then three more concentric circles out there, which could have been the Venus with the coma, Mars in the center, which would have been the dot, and then you have Saturn and the red rings. Because if you apply D-stretch app to it, actually the red ring does go around the whole side and envelops both of those other outer circles, which would give either the Saturn was turned on its side. It could have been Uranus, which we know they say was older than the father of Saturn, because it has rings on its side. But something was there where the plasma sheath is actually continuing up from the ground and reaching up into the center planets, with the arrow actually piercing all three bodies. But those two on the outside, which gave me the thoughts that it could have just been, at that time, comets without tails. And we were just, glancing at it when we were staring right down the barrel of the tail. And because that goes, then we get to the left image of the petroglyphs. You can still see where I get to that image of the siding spring comets. At the top, you can see below that like diamond shaped pattern, which I think could be like a cathode, anode tube display. The two comets are present right below with that glittery stuff emanating from the head. And that looks to me like comet siding spring, but it has a twin, a smaller twin. And that actually is reminiscent of all the Native American tales of the twin heroes. One's usually larger than the other, but they're still regarded as twins. And then off to the right, you have the three images of the planets, the polar configuration. And above it, it could have been like they came out of focus or something, because that actually looks to me like the Pictish symbol of the comb and mirror, just without the comb. That the image at the top with the looks like a ping pong paddle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys remember this, but going back to those diamonds at the top of the image on the left, Anthony Peratt talked about how a lot of times you'll have those, they look like they're essentially pearls on a string, they're plasmoids on a string, and there's 9 of them. That's apparently when plasmoids form, that's one of the configurations that take. And if you look carefully there, I can see 9 diamonds. Some of them are a little rougher cut than others or worn away, but I can see 9 right there. So,
and on those Japanese pagodas where they have the big lightning rods on top, there are 9 cylinders that go around them.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
That's cool.
It is. All right. Please continue.
So, continuing on. And just because, not just that I just based this whole idea on, a few petroglyphs and have it to be that, outlandish. The NASA Jet Propulsion Lab Center for Near Object Studies has created an interactive site regarding the twin comets, which were just previously observed back in 2016. Here, one can see the potential for a polar configuration with twin comets, as all the involved planets and twin comets are present. One just needs a Miyake event and the polar configuration, when the polar configuration was properly oriented, to see some exciting events transpire in the heavens. Events which could have been recorded in ancient legends, artwork, and rock art. So as you can see, these are comets 252P Linear and comet P 2016 BA14 Pan-STARRS. And you can see how they almost just nearly nick the Earth's orbit right over here, which would be really close. And as they're approaching, if at times, since these are Jovian comets, they could have been involved at the time of the polar configuration breakup. If in fact we actually could get all these planets aligned as a polar configuration at that spot, you could actually see what would have been the threefold deity image with 2 comets to the right and left of its image, affecting auroral images and all that stuff, causing confronted animals. And it's all there, and the potential for it there. And I'm not trying to say that for sure or verify that these comets are the ones of antiquity, because it shows, I think, what was it that I did in the original video with Ben on the channel, Astrograph. He actually backdates the orbits, and there's a time, I think back in 1870s or something like that, where the equation just jumps. It just doesn't flow fluidly. So I think it's at that time where the comets actually did come together and were at one time, but then the equation just blew up at that time. Yeah. And then try to start projecting something new with later data. So I think that jump is whenever it actually bifurcated, because it was going backwards in time as you watch the video. So you're actually going to its original bifurcation moment. So, but it just shows that the potential for twin comets at that time to have existed, and with the polar configuration could have happened during one of these events. It would have definitely explain all the legends, artwork, and the rock art that we see, that we attribute to anthropomorphic rock or images or aliens or ant people and whatnot.
Easily. Yes.
So getting into the conclusion now.
Damn it, we're done already? God.
We're already done. So I guess I'll get ready for getting hammered with some questions here. This presentation has discussed how telluric currents are electric currents already in the Earth and can be stepped up in power during major solar events, forming craters. This discussion covered how these same induced currents can be responsible for shocked quartz and glassy spherules found in some meteorites and tektites, providing geophysicists with another tool to explain crater formation without solely relying on high velocity impacts. This presentation explained how a Miyake event could have induced telluric currents to form Upheaval Dome, Utah, and a unique form of a now seen called the Obsession Stone. And the material provided today suggests that a triple Miyake event over the short span of approximately 250 years could be responsible for the many creation legends told worldwide and influencing culture even today. And that is it.
You have the high impact. NASA has a lab that actually studies high speed impacts. and they found that any comet coming in at more than a 20% grade has a chance of leaving a oblong crater, not a round crater.
Yeah.
So, and when you're talking about trillions of craters, like on Mars, for example, well, at least some of those should be oblong, but they're not.
Right.
I mean, they're all 90 degrees.
Yup. Can I go back to Upheaval Dome and talk about that for a second?
Yeah, sure.
All right, check this out. I was talking to Chris Selly, and Robert, I know you know him really well. Matt, do you know Chris Selly?
No, I do not.
Okay, well, you're about to. He was texting me last night or a couple nights ago. Let me share my screen and show you what he sent over.
Ben's popular.
Yeah. You see this down here in the corner? This is the text box.
All right.
Okay.
The salt path follows the charge current path, telluric material separation. Oils the dielectric just like in our transformers. But if you look at this, what does that say right there?
Really tiny.
Salt dome.
Yeah, that's one of the theories for Upheaval Dome.
That's one of the theories for Upheaval Dome is that it's a salt dome, but they have no idea.
Salt dome that pushed up, it completely. There's not even evidence of it being there anymore because it completely eroded away.
It completely eroded away.
Yeah.
But here's Chris sending a little graphic showing that telluric currents can exactly do that.
Yep.
In fact, there's another version of this. Actual sunspots are, and I've talked to, was it sunspots or was it CME? I think it's CMEs. I was talking to Steve Smith or somebody about that CMEs are exactly this sort of thing. It's a bursting forth through a weak spot and then pow, it just explodes out into space. So what you're seeing here in this graphic from Chris is you see the different layers, you see the tan layer, you see the yellow layer and the white layer above it. Those on the sun would be considered double layers. But the pressure, since there's a constant inflow of electricity or charge from the poles of the sun, the pressure constantly inside is building and it finds a weak point in the double layers and just goes, bleh! And that's what a CME is. And we're seeing the same thing. Imagine that. I know it's a stretch. Imagine seeing that same process of pressure building up underground, finding a weak spot, and then just breaking forth. Blah. There it is.
Well, it's kind of like a gobstopper in a microwave,
Right? Yeah.
You bite on that thing after the layer, one of the layers have gotten more fluid than the others, and it's just going to blow up on your face. And I think that's why people stop doing that.
Right. Just.
Well, that's pretty fascinating.
This is so freaking obvious. It's just painful that we're still following. Say it, Matt. Dark matter scaffolding on.
Dark matter scaffolding.
Say what you said.
Oh, that was the explanation for what that Birkeland current that NASA saw was, is that it's a gravitational collapse along dark energy scaffolding.
Wow.
Yeah. And they didn't predict those things, but now they're the experts on what they are.
But they actually say that they were predicted back in the day, and it was like, yeah, who did this prediction when, and or are you just saying this because
it's nonsense? They didn't even predict the cosmic web until after we saw it, and then they invented dark matter, and then they call it a prediction. Imagine being able to do that, come up with the answer after the failed observation, and then say you predicted it.
Well, I would like to say that vanilla pudding can solve everything, just by using enough of it, but that doesn't actually make it so.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It is.
But they just slap that on. They either slap quantum in front of it, or they just use dark energy can solve it, and they just let it be at that point, and they get published. Because it's theoretical physics at that point.
Yeah, there's got to be some way to solve this. We got to get funding out of the hands of the government, or if it is in the hands of government, it's got to be some sort of online blockchain thing that people can vote on for where they want their funding to go.
Funny you mentioned that, because that's exactly why Ben actually went to the town hall meeting for Representative Mike Kennedy here, who sits on the science and technology panel at the House of Representatives, who controls the purse strings. So he made his attempt there to, make his case that saying, especially after the Sabine Hassenfelder video came out saying that, she was basically told that a lot of these models are worthless.
Yes.
By the so-called authors that wrote the papers on these people. They are worthless models,
Yeah.
getting billions of dollars in funding, and we are paying for that, and yet we have no say in where this funding goes, and especially since plasma cosmology is accepted by the IEEE as a valid alternative to Big Bang. We should be able to get equal funding for this kind of a theory, yet we don't. And that's what I think that's what he made his case to Mike Kennedy for, Representative Mike Kennedy for. And we would love to get some feedback from him in his office, but we've been trying, and just hammering him,
Here's the follow up to that. This is, as you can see, I'm screen sharing again, right? So this is Nathan Allen. He was there at the salon. Robert, I don't know if you remember him or not.
Okay.
He was one of the guys who was there. So he's part of the EU, and he just lives up the street from me in Provo, and we've started having lunch together every week. And he just sent me another little note here saying, "Hi, Ben, we should do lunch again soon." Our next lunch date, I'm going to invite either Senator Kennedy or one of his staff members to join us.
Representative Kennedy.
Representative Kennedy, sorry. Yes.
If only we could get Walt Thornhill, if he was still alive, to go threaten him.
That'd be nice.
You don't want to know what happens to people that don't agree.
You are being threatened by the ghost of Walt Thornhill. Oh man, we're gonna have.
I was just liking that from because you just had that episode with Dr. Claridge where he said that everything is heterogeneous. So and that's part of the beauty of the EU is that we can disagree and not be like ostracizing one another.
Yeah.
Because Ev didn't agree with too much of my the twin comet theory, though, even though he says he doesn't want to rule it out.
Yeah.
And he needs more information to be convinced. And even I said even more information needs to be studied. Yeah. So it's just I'm just throwing it out there because it would actually explain the anti-confronted animal image or the confronted animals whenever they appear, as opposed to just a solar sun disk,
Yeah.
So sometimes they appear, sometimes they're not there. And when you do see the anti-confronted animals or confronted, there's usually some kind of a symbol in them that shows that there's a cometary feature there.
Yeah.
Like there's either that ring or the concentric ring, or even like a little spiral somewhere next to that image or in the image, like where the heart would be or the shoulder. There's some kind of weird little symbol in that kind of imagery that shows that this is something outside of the polar configuration, and it's not much of it's talked about because everybody focuses on the center image. But what's the story behind these things, and why are they there sometimes? Why are they not?
Yeah,
and that actually shows the cometary periodicity. You have about 5-6 years, which is what those two comets I showed.
Right.
Well, they were there and not.
Go ahead, Ben.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, Ev doesn't even believe in the proto-Saturn theory. So, there's tons of disagreement.
Yes. He doesn't agree with everything. And some like Dr. Claridge even disagreed with Wall sometimes. And I was like, well, that's cool.
That brings up a valid point, though. It's that one of the other things Claridge said is that we don't have a complete model because we don't have the manpower to go through all the data. Right. So we're still in the hypothesis phase in a lot of areas.
Yep. And so that's why I just wanted to throw it out there, and that's why I like to get all the kind of formats that I can, and just let the viewer discern for themselves. That's why.
Sure.
Whenever I teach whenever I do a Spark Science presentation, I tell the kids, I try and get them interactive, and I try and get them to ask questions. I say, look, there's never a stupid question. There's never a stupid answer. Because science is about the exploration. It's not about validating what's already been validated. That's not science.
Right.
In its truest
form. I say that to my daughters too. It's like if you're trying to honestly learn something, there's no such thing as a stupid question. So
there's not, because you have to start somewhere. If your starting point is that there is a bearded blonde Norwegian flying in the clouds with a hammer, as ridiculous as that sounds to us now, you have to start somewhere. And then the first thing you'll say, oh, great, let's send a camera up and see if we can see him flying around. Oh, we haven't been able to see him flying around. Well, maybe that's not the right answer. But we have a camera up there.
You see him in this video all the time with Walt Thornhill's face on it.
That's my favorite thing ever.
Yep. Oh, it is. Matt, I am totally using that in our marketing. That wall is Thor.
That's pretty funny.
I've been promoting that everywhere.
That's a good point too, though. Just if you look at ancient artwork, there's nothing in the contemporary world that would suggest why people would draw this strange symbolic stuff. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
with Venus choking the two geese. Like, who came up with that? Like, that's not like a normal path of fiction. Clearly, they were seeing something and trying to interpret it.
Right.
With
Because
in
that same
terms of
image
stuff
appears
that they know.
everywhere. That's what
Yes.
I was trying to suggest, is that it's that same image appears everywhere. It starts of in the Far East with the three-legged crow with the Queen Mother of the West. She's the central figure, but on to the right and the left side you have the tiger or a dragon, and then you also have the three-legged crow either above or below her.
Yeah.
So, or she's holding it in her left hand in some images. So that means we were thrown out of whack. But then
Yeah.
you get over into Persia, and you have the mistress of animals or the master of animals. You can even see that same motif in India through some of the temples that they have in there, or temple art or cave art that they have out there, which has that same central image with two either serpents or something on the right and left.
Yeah.
Get further into the Mesopotamia and Greece, you have Hercules or the Pillars of Hercules, or the infant Hercules strangling the serpents.
Or Samson.
Or Samson, yeah, the Samson in that story where he's pushing on the pillars.
Pushing the pillars, yeah.
Yeah.
Archetypes.
Same archetypal story. Then you go into the Nordic areas where you got the Gunderstruck cauldron, where the same facial feature of the Ka, which could be seen the same image on the Ben stones, or the headdresses where you can see those two. They're like nine. They look like nine nines, like a golden nine with backs to each other. Those could be the two comets that are represented with the red central eye. But those two would be with the long tails, of the spiraling tails, with those little nine-shaped figures, whatever they're called.
Yeah, the hats are a big, like all over the ancient world.
Weird tall headdresses with those two little curly things. They have like a circular thing, but with like a spirally tail, and they look like in the shape of a nine, but they're backwards to each other. Those could be comets in reference to the central image of the polar configuration. So
right. But you can map out almost every stage of the polar configuration just based on hats. I mean, like,
exactly,
because they changed their shape. Like,
exactly.
When I was in Thailand, I saw a Buddha crown that kind of went off to the side and then up, like you see occasionally in Egypt.
Yep, the crowns, that was the representation of the king there and the crown of Venus. So as that polar configuration changed, they had to change the crown.
Yeah.
Or they got conquered by a nation that had a different crown, and they just muted it then because they formed a new nation.
Yeah, I think Ev is putting out a book where he's kind of putting these in chronological order, like the different symbols that appear. And if he does that, you could almost map out the chronology of the polar configuration. And that might not give us a timeline in years, but it would give us at least an order.
Yeah.
Exactly. Robert, I have a question for you. When you were putting together this presentation, what surprised you? Anything?
Well, the fact that I was finding so much about the twin comets, and then I found out that there was multiple stories of twins, but not being the same twins involved, which is like getting into what can all these stories be, or who these images are. Because I know Ev talks about a lot of the Mesoamerica and South American cultures, and a lot of those references are to Venus. And, I don't argue with that. But then, like when we spoke about in our presentation with the twin comets about how Hun Hunapa and Hunpa actually died and were executed, but then the head of Hunapa became Hunapu, and then the other twin Xbalanque. So there was two different sets of twins in the Maya stories, and one came from the other. Now, then we also have the reference of the Utah pictographs where the ant figure that had like the two left hands, but the hands had a hole in them, right? But they were literally two left hands. So they weren't like a left and a right hand centered on a figure, but they looked like two left hands based on where the thumbs would have been placed, but with holes in the center, which like the coma of a comet.
Are there any other tales that you know of that involve hands with holes in the center, like a stigmata?
You can look up the Great Comet of, I think, 1744 or something like that. It looks exactly like a hand with like 5 different long streamers with a smaller one wider being where the thumb position would be. So it looks like a giant hand. And if you saw 2 of them that were like mirrored to each other, to like say an electric current or a Birkeland current going through the middle of the 2, they would be in opposition to one another. Basically, they would look mirrored
That's
because
wild.
just the tail would be going in the opposite direction as the current was going.
I saw some YouTube show a million years ago. I think it was called Zeitgeist, that was trying to make the case that the Christian religion was astrological in nature, and they detailed how like the sun stops rising, and for three days while it's sitting underneath the Southern Cross, it doesn't move, and then it starts moving the other direction on the horizon as we move into spring, signifying rebirth and new life. Makes you wonder if, like, the story about the stigmata has something to do with that, or if it's maybe another archetypal theme.
I wouldn't rule it out, because I know it says in Genesis that those images in the heavens are for signs, and then if you can see that when Christ died, he was actually crucified. So when he returned, he had holes in the palms of his hands, and these pictographs that are shown in central Utah obviously have, especially the head of Sinbad himself. I mean, if you can look that up with the two comets on the side, I call them comets, but they look like serpents.
Mm-hmm.
But the two comets on the left and right, but even the image itself with the hands reaching out have holes in the palms of its hands and the soles of its feet.
And the serpents would have eyes.
Well, they could have eyes, but they have like halos of hair, they call them, and there's like several layers of them. And that's why I compared
double layers
with comet, because it has those double layers in the coma. And they also have like an anti-tail, which would be where the tongue is protruding from the comet itself. Not that image, but the other one.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Which one?
But actually, if you stop right there, now this is actually a great image to use. Could you go back to that other one first?
Yes.
And then we'll go back to this one. Okay. So this is actually one of the petroglyphs that actually got me thinking about multiple twins, because you can see on the right-hand side of this petroglyph, this is the one that's actually similar to the one in Val Camonica, Italy. Same horn type figure, same kind of spiral in the abdomen section, and it's also holding a serpent in the same hand, right? And then there was also a serpent that's separated in the right area, so they even have the same image over in Italy. However, you don't have further on the right, you don't have these twins of comets. You have up on the top or right-hand corner, you have two discs with like this furry tail. Yeah. And then below the serpent, right below the serpent that's being held, you have another two discs with feathery hair. So these are gave me, two separate sets of twins, right? So you also have this on the upper left of the image where you have the helmeted, kind of head figures, also with two kind of discs below them, which could be like either cometary tails, because if you look at the devil comet, it actually had like horns protruding from it. So it could be the horns were just going in the opposite direction, but they're all sets of twins. All four of the images have a pair of twin comets underneath them.
I wonder if that image there is like separate. Like the one on the left is what happened first, and the one on the right is what it turned into.
Robert,
we can never tell where the story starts and begins and how it transitions or what's going on here. All I can just separate is that there are definitely, twin images of comets that are together, and they're definitely categorized as twins because they're being separated by twos.
Right.
Yeah, Robert and I have talked about this. What if this is all one? If it's a chronology, like a comic book, but they didn't draw the panel markings or whatnot. But I mean, at least you can identify that those images were significant enough to spend the time to etch them into the stone. So whether that it all happened at exactly the same time or not, almost not as important as the fact that that's what actually did happen.
Yeah, they made an impression.
It made an impression. Let's go to this.
Now, if you want to go on to the next one, this is where I actually said that the images, you can see the serpents on the left and the right that are going up and down, and at their heads, if you can zoom in anymore, it looks like there's the coma of a comet.
Well, he made it out there. He didn't crash and crack a rib, did he?
Oh no. Okay, so we're gonna fill in the blanks here. Last time we went out in September to go to this site here, we were riding on his electrical bikes, and I never rode one before, so I was trying to get a feel for it, and I had the thing topped out, and I was riding on a right-handed bank turn, and all of a sudden on the far end of it was just a pit of sand, and it just went right out from underneath me, and I ended up crashing, and I broke several ribs.
Oh,
Jesus. In the first hours of that trip that weekend.
Yeah, not to mention the drive down it. That's when our trip started. But yeah, just finally getting to a site and making our way to the site, I crashed and burned.
Be careful. We need your brain.
He stuck with it for like another 24 hours, and then got home and then went to the hospital. Like, oh, I've got broken ribs. You're like, holy crap.
Wow.
Yeah. So as you can see here, the left and right images of the comets aren't symmetrical. There's a little bit of difference. One is a little bit whiter and the other one's darker. But they also have the tongue protruding from the top, which I consider is what's called an anti-tail on comets, and they actually reach out towards the power source. Like say in our comets now, they would actually be a tail reaching out to the sun, as opposed to a dust trail and a plasma trail going off in the opposite direction.
Wouldn't that little tail just be a filament that leads to the sun, but most of it's in dark mode?
It could be, yeah, and like they're still trying to figure out what actually even causes them, what they are. But yeah, that could very well be a little bit of a current that actually has ionized material that's
like a
visible.
step leader almost.
Yeah,
like a step leader.
Out. Yep. Right. But it also has like these hairs on it, which are just going in twins or pairs or hairs that are just shells around the comet itself, and they're just like basically the double layers of the coma of a comet. That's why it gave me the idea that these are also twin comets as well.
Notice that if these are comets, the coma of this one on the left is a little different than this one on the right.
Right.
Now that could just be weathering from the rock, or maybe not, because there's definitely difference.
If you can zoom in any more, you can look at the palms of the hands. There's holes there.
That's wild.
And if I don't know if you can go any further down at the bottom of the screen, because there's also holes in the feet, but you can see the holes in the hands.
Wow, really?
Yep.
Right there.
And that matches another image of one of the ant creatures. I think it's in one of the canyons that are just to the south of that. Hey. But it was actually in the Twin Comet video. It's in black and white, but it actually has another image of 4 of the comets with the devil horns grouped by twos, right? Because 2 of them are really faded. The other 2 are just closer in proximity to the ant creature. And then the ant creature, his hands even look like the double layer commas and the holes in the hands. They always look like, and they're both like left-handed. That's the weird thing, is where the thumb is positioned on both of them. They're left-handed.
How was Prometheus affixed to the mountain?
Prometheus?
Yes.
Affixed to the mountain? I'm not too familiar with that story.
I just
kind of like got into the Pillars of Hercules and how it was tied to Hercules and where did all that go, because I wanted to know what mountain did he break up, because I knew what's attributed to now, but then if it was Atlas, that was mythology, so it didn't actually exist. So I went further as to what was the mountain. It was supposed to be Atlas, was petrified by Perseus using the head of Medusa, kind of like the Clash of the Titans movie. But this basically does Atlas instead of the Gorgon,
right?
Or instead of Kraken.
But,
he does the world mountain basically, and then later on Hercules comes and breaks the mountain in half so he can steal the bulls from Geryon, which is also the 3-bodied creature or deity as well. So that's kind of the depth of mythology that I have. I didn't get into any other stories in depth other than what you see on the movies and such.
Right.
That's cool. Did you find that, Matt, about how Perseus was
looking for it now? It says Prometheus was bound to the rock or mountain.
Prometheus.
We describe by being chained or tied with unbreakable bonds. Okay, so we don't have any stigma there.
No, but I see where you're going with that.
I'm just wondering, because you often see the same themes repeated.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always understood that the Greeks' mythology is comes from each city-state, which was its own nation. Therefore, they had their own stories, and they just it wasn't just like they all went to the same church of Apollo or they all went to the same church of Hera or something. No, each city-state had its own stories, and they're all basically the same person.
Yeah, but we're looking for the archetypes, the things that they have in common.
Right. Because, what they say that Helios was also was Kronos at the same time, and I'm not sure if that was cross between Roman and Greek, but even references of Apollo and Ares, I'm sure it'd be or Apollo being what would it be? the sun god Helios.
Well,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
I suspect that's a retelling of when proto Saturn enters the system of Sol and the sun
right.
approaches, and like in the Sumerian, well, later than Sumerian Babylonian text, they call him Marduk. I can't recall the Sumerian name, but the sun god.
Right. Yeah. But even the sun god even was a different deity. It wasn't just Zeus all the time. It was and then because they even called a sun god was Apollo because he carried the sun or whatever. And then there's also these other minor sun deities or whatnot. So yeah, it's just the thing is there were just not as many prominent cultures telling their story, but it's all the same character in the sky. It was just their name for him at the time or her, depending on the association. Which gets me back to that Mississippian tribe where actually the twins actually can break out of the crack in the back of the raccoon-faced horned serpent. Right, that would have been the same deity, horned deity, as the polar configuration. But that actually, I think, was the actual tribute or record of the event of Mars and Venus separating from the plasma or the polar configuration itself. They were born from the polar configuration at that time. Gotcha. Therefore, they became loads on the solar circuit, and then took on their cometary features.
Matt,
Gotcha.
Matt asked a good question yesterday of Ev of how Venus came to be known as female and Mars as male. And it was actually stupidly obvious. Within the polar configuration, Mars entered Venus.
Right.
And
he penetrated
from Venus. It penetrated Venus. You're like, oh, okay, so this is just a sexual reference. Right. Okay. Right. The thing that does the penetrating is the male, thing gets penetrated as the female. Got it.
Right. Dick jokes go way back.
That's what it was.
I kind of made that reference as to why it was like sometimes the polar configuration was attributed to Saturn, because when it was just basically fixated with Saturn being the primary wheel or whatever, that was when it was a male deity. But as soon as it started taking on that female feature with the stranded hair or the birth moment, they attributed to a female moment. And that's why that's why we have all this confusion with cross.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense why Kronos is a man and all of a sudden, yeah.
Right, but that's why all these ancient deities could also be male and female, because at one time they were attributed being Saturn, but then all of a sudden with the birthing moment, it was attributed to a female trait, which they that Venus kind of took over the gods.
I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but there was a picture of a sperm hitting an egg, and at that moment there's an electrical discharge that goes across the face of the egg. Have you guys seen that video?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's pretty cool. I mean, just cool. So illustrative of the whole electric universe being active at every single scale, not just astrophysically, but microscopically as well.
God, I wonder how all this ties into like the mythology of the three old gods, where you've got Moloch, Baal, and Isis. And Isis is the one that becomes a man at the end of her life cycle. And you've got
I'd probably have to say it has something to do with this whole the whole story, just how that culture explained it. You'd still have your threefold deity issue.
Yeah.
One of them was female, so yeah, they have a goddess in that representation. But like I said, some cultures would say when they broke apart, that would be a birthing moment, because at some point Venus would have the long streaming hair reaching out to Saturn, still giving her a female entity, but still being protected by Saturn or whatnot. But whenever she started to move out, or when Saturn started to dip down, and then Venus became the third eye of the cosmic bull or the Apis bull. That was when, the story started changing. The characters started getting different names, but it was just still the same characters,
Right. Well, her flowing hair turns into serpents because the plasma goes bananas, and she turns into Medusa.
Right. And then, we get caught in the tail of that shit, and then everybody gets turned to stone. So,
exactly. So one more question for me, if you don't mind. So you are into the electric universe, so you've probably given it some thought. When you look up into space, what are you looking at?
When I'm looking at, I'm still trying to find Virgo, because that's my my zodiac sign. And I know that the stars in it are very dim, so it's very hard to see. But I know that you can see Leo pretty prominent in the sky right now, so I just look a little bit more to the east, in the sky, and I just know that it's somewhere in there. but I still I'm always looking for Virgo. That's basically the truth of it.
Well, what I mean is when I look into space, I've got it in my head that I'm looking at the molecular structure of something bigger, like a giant cosmic brain. That's where I'm kind of at. What do you think?
I've had those thoughts. So we were pondering the Laniakea and then Quipu. Now they say that the larger structure there, and it's just they're all just filamentary structures that are just within filamentary structures.
As above, so below.
Above, so below, and then it gets into that scalability of electricity. So yeah, I've given that thought, but then it's I'm just convinced of it now. I don't even want to even ponder it anymore. I'm just convinced that that's the way it is. So I'm gonna get back to looking for Virgo because it's hard for me to see in the sky.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced too, and that's kind of what leads me to thinking that gas giant planets probably spit out moons and planets, because we see that happening on the cellular structure with mitosis. And if it's the same processes, then it makes sense that planets are going to be doing the same thing.
Yep. Just don't want to be on when that happens.
Or nearby.
Yeah,
or nearby, yeah. Well, it seems like eventually we'll have to spot it with the James Webb. I mean, I think this model will eventually take over just by the breadth of observations we make. You can already see a lot of the mainstreamers are coming over to the plasmoid idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was always wondering if because they take the images of, they say that a star is actually sucking in the gas of another planet or another smaller star. What if it's going so fast that it's actually, the imagery is actually going in reverse, and when you look at the propellers of a helicopter, it actually looks like it's going backwards.
Oh yeah.
So it's actually not actually eating the star; it's actually feeding the star. And it's
that's an interesting point.
And we're just catching it so slow that it looks like it's going backwards. So I always wondered that, and if that was so, what would that do to the gravitational, model?
It would screw it up.
Yeah, it would. All this time they've been saying it's been feeding on it, when it's actually regurgitating at near relativistic speed. Yeah.
Well, cool, fantastic, Robert.
Thank you very much. Thanks for doing this again. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
y'all take care.
You too. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Brainstorm with Sparks and Finn. Hope you learned something new or found some food for thought. If you did, take a second to smash that like and subscribe button. Consider joining our Patreon to help Sparks and I spread the word. And then join us next time as we explore this amazing electric universe. Cheers!